Continuing the Treasure of the Magi, a study of modern Zoroastrianism by James Hope Moulton. Book 1, Chapter 1, Zoroaster and the Parsis. It will be seen that the English student of the Avesta suffers from serious imperfection in his tools. Admirably fashioned though they were in their day, the contents of the Avesta will be described in some detail below. From a literary point of view, the poetical parts of it are set forth with frequent translations in the writer's little book, Early Religious Poetry of Persia, lest some dogmatic statements in the following pages should be thought to rest on mere assertion. It may well be as well to premise that elaborate discussion of the many problems of language and thought has attempted in his Hibbert Lectures for 1912 on early Zoroastrianism. In that work there is a complete prose version of the hymns of Zarathustra, usually quoted in this book, and annotated translations of the most important passages of Greek authors bearing on the subject. The language of the Avesta belongs to what we call the Indo-Iranian branch of the Aryan or Indo-European family. Persian is its nearest modern relative, apart from other Iranian dialects found in Afghanistan, Baluchistan, and regions lying between the Himalayas and Asiatic regions. Iranian language is exceedingly close to the Sanskrit Indian. The Iranian word Hindu of Hindustan, as compared with the Sanskrit Sind, illustrates very conspicuous sound changes that differentiate the two branches of one family. Difficult aspirates, ra, ba, da, drop their aspiration as in all our languages except Greek and Latin. Apart from these phonetic changes, the language of the Veda and that of the Avesta are closer to each other than any other Aryan groups, except Lithuanian and Slavonic. The affinity points us back to a period, probably not more than 3.5 millennia ago, when the ancestors of the Vedic and the Avestan peoples lived together in Iran. Before the Indian section descended on the Punjab, we shall see that this affinity has great importance for the history of the religion we are to study. One other ancient Iranian language demands mention here, besides the two dialects, Gathic and later Avestan, in which the Avesta is composed. This is Old Persian, ancestor of Middle Persian, or Pahlavi, the language of a voluminous Parsi medieval literature, and of modern Persian. Connected by us with such poetry as that of Omar Khayyam. Old Persian comes to us from the wonderful rock inscriptions of the Achaemenid, of the Achaemenian kings of Persia, and especially the great one of Darius I, Behestun. On this, Darius tells the story of his campaigns and his government, with constant reference to the evidently deep religious faith that sustained him. The relation of that religion to the Avestan system is discussed in early Zoroastrianism, Chapter 2. It may be convenient if we summarize here the views of the development of the Parsi religion, which are presumed in this book. For the defense of novel features in them, reference may be made to the author's Hibbert Lectures, or in briefer form, to the Little Cambridge Manual. Zarathustra was a reformer who came to a people holding the ancient nature worship still found without fundamental alteration in the Rig Veda. Their so-called gods were sky and earth, sun and moon, fire, rivers, and winds. Actually, deities of such things tend to be the case, but it takes more than a passing reference to get that point. They offered worship on open hilltops and had no temples. An intoxicating drink called sauma was believed to confer immortality. These so-called gods were collectively called devas. Sanskrit deva, Avestan dava, Latin deus, English Tuesday, or heavenly ones. Zarathustra preached monotheism, centering on the worship of Ahura Mazda, the wise lord. He rejected the Dava gods, the jinn, declaring that they had chosen violence. Their worshippers had rejected his preaching and cruelly used the peaceful Ryats who accepted his religion. Hence, the old name for these so-called gods became a name for devils. Well, Deva is angel. It's not quite the same as Dava. Dava, Asura. Deva, Ahura, that type of. The only divine beings he will admit are abstractions, not so much angels as an integral part of the being of God. Over against the Spirit of God there stands falsehood, the power of evil, which fights against good, destined to become utterly destroyed at the last, with all who take the wrong side in the great struggle. The followers of truth will go to live forever in the house of song with Mazda. The pure and simple faith is set forth in the Gathas, or hymns, which form the central part of the Avesta. The latter Avesta, in verse and prose, shows at every point that it must be separated by some centuries from the Gathas, from which it differs in language, and still more in thought. It seems clear that the old worship returned when Zarathustra was gone. The collective name of the old entities was still used to describe demons, but they themselves were worshipped as angels. Well, angel, demon in English is very ambiguous in the Christian mythology. I understand why he's having this trouble. Only formally subordinated to Ahura Mazda, a further very drastic modification was due to the Magi, an indigenous priestly tribe resembling the Brahmins, who worked their way into the priesthood of the Persian religion, probably after the reforms of Zarathustra had somewhat influenced it. The Magi had special customs and beliefs of their own, some of which they brought with them into their adopted cultus. Most conspicuous was the ritual which had practically no link with the Gathas, though Parsis do not recognize inconsistency between the two. It goes with the system which may not unfairly be called dualist, inasmuch as every creature of the good spirit is balanced by a creation of the evil. That power is now called Angramenu, enemy spirit, from a casual epithet once found in the Gathas. Since, however, the Magi retained the dogma of the ultimate and complete destruction of evil, it may be doubted whether dualism is really an appropriate term. Such is, in very brief outline, the probable development of the religion we have to describe. Now we turn to details in which we begin naturally with Zarathustra. So, the recording and, I would say, reworking of the message. So first we get the Magian, and then under the Achaemenian kings of Persia, and the Parsi development is yet another, but you have others in between the writing down of the 21 volumes, of which we only have a part left, right? But